Is it real? And what is it doing there?
Now they're speaking out, saying there are UFOs in U.S. airspace and they need to be taken seriously.
A family in Highland, Michigan believes their house is actually haunted and thinks something is harming their little girl.
They're unidentified in U.S. airspace.
The U.S. Navy has finally acknowledged that videos appearing to show UFOs flying through the air are real.
I'm Todd Bates. I've been investigating the paranormal for years, yet still have no definite answers. Join me on this mysterious journey as we discuss all things paranormal, right down to the little gnomes. Why do millions experience these mysterious phenomenon, yet we have no proof? Welcome to Haunted Voices Radio, where I try and gather the pieces that may one day form yet another puzzle.
And a good evening, one and all. Welcome, Haunted Voices Live, WLTK-DB.com. That's where you need to go. We've got some cool new stuff over there. And we've already got our first spammer there in YouTube. You got to love those fine folks. Got to catch them quick. They're giving away free girls over there. This stuff is insane, the way these people do that. Anyway, we have got an amazing show. It is November the 11th, Veterans Day. Thank you to all that have served out there. My goodness. And that's what we're going to touch on tonight. We're going to be touching on World War II, World War I, some of the mysteries behind them, the facts with our guest, author, historian, Jeff Davis. He's going to be joining us here in a little while. A few announcements here for you. We've got some pretty cool stuff in the works. There we go. The book is out. It is out. It is paperback, available paperback, hardback, Kindle, on Amazon, or you can buy a direct copy there on my website, toddmichaelbates.com. You can buy it there. I'll sign the copy and send it to you. A lot of folks are doing that, and I can't thank you guys enough for the support. The first shipment arrived. It was crazy. It was crazy to hold this in your hands, your first book. It's just, the feeling is amazing. I'm sure Jeff can spread some information on that as well. He's a well-published author. Hey, Corey, how you doing, my friend? There's Corey. There's Meg. And so if you guys want to copy that, you know where to get it. Just search for The Haunted Voice. It's there at Amazon. It's going to be available at Walmart, Apple Books, and all those places here soon, once we get some dimensions and all that fun stuff. But also the mobile app. Those of you guys that are using the mobile app right now, you'll notice a complete redesign. It has been completely redesigned. It's got some cool stuff in there for you. It's free of charge. You can download it, listen to the show, watch the show, and just search WLTK-DB Talk Radio at the App Store, Google Play, places like that. Download it for free. Like I said, you can listen, you can shop. There's a lot of fun stuff to do on there. Hey, Paul. Oh, Paulie. Good to see him. And past shows have been added to the website. This is something cool. You guys have been, it's so hard after a show is complete to get you guys the past show and put it in your lap, because that's what a lot of people want these days. Of course, I like that too, on demand. So what we have on the website, those shows that have the private channels, you will find their shows, their past shows right there on site. So just go to WLTK-DB.com. You can do /shows. It'll take you right there, find your show, and you'll find all their past podcasts right there for you now. New shows coming. This is crazy, folks. We are at max. We are at max with the station. Can't take any more. We've got enough right now. We've maxed out the station, but we've got some great shows coming here now. On the 22nd of November, we've got Slipstream Shaman. That's going to be hosted by Todd Wilcox. He's going to be coming on board. and discussing energy healing, all that cool stuff like that. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be Tuesdays from noon to 2. Then we have Twisted Ascensions. It's going to be debuting December 9th from 8 to 10 p.m. here on Friday nights. It'll be before this show with Caden and Alyssa Mask of Southern Ascensions team. Amazing stuff. So we've got that coming here for you. And the chat box has been added to the website there on the Watch Live area. You'll watch live. You'll see there's a chat box there now. I'll try to monitor those things. Meg, she's a moderator in there as well. And we'll try and get those things back and forth to you. If you post anything in there, we'll get them read for you. Hi, Michael. Good friend right there, Michael La Chiana. Now, with all this stuff out of the way here, let's get to our guests, because I am chomping at the bits to, screw up and learn something like everybody else is here tonight. I mean, it's why we're here. Jeff Davis was born in Vancouver, Washington. He's been a guest expert on Coast to Coast AM, the History Channel TV show Haunted History, Northwest Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, Ghost Adventures, The Dead Files, and That White People Shit. I love that. Now, Jeff spent many years in the U.S. Army and Army Reserves. He served in Italy, South Korea, Japan, Bosnia, and Afghanistan in a number of positions, ranging from infantryman to military historian, to putting him on puppet shows at orphanages. Without further ado, Mr. Jeff Davis. Jeff, it's great to have you. How are you?
It's great to be here, Todd. Thank you actually for keeping the bio brief. As you know, and a lot of other people watching this know, sometimes we authors tend to have these very, very lengthy, like 2-page bios. It gets kind of embarrassing actually to have people read all that stuff off, because I'm just me. And I actually am honored to be here on this very important day talking to you.
It's amazing. I want to, first of all, thank you for taking time to be here. This is your day. Thank you for your service, Jeff. It's very important.
Most of the time it was a pleasure, except for the first helicopter accident, the second, the third, and so on. But other veterans had it much tougher than me. I came out still walking, so I am blessed.
Understood. Absolutely. Say hi to my daughter, Kirsten. Hi, honey.
Hi, Kirsten.
Now, we're going to get into some things tonight. History. It's something we all need to really brush up on. And where I'd like to start with this, Jeff, World War I, it seems to be a war that a lot of people really don't associate with, other big, they remember World War II. They don't really see that as some kind of iconic war. Tell us about World War II and some of the facts behind it and what got this started.
Do you mean World War II or one?
Or one, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. It's especially, you and I traded a few messages before when we were trying to figure out what exactly we're going to talk about. And if you even talking about not even world events, mainstream, but world paranormal events, World War I had a tremendous impact on paranormal, spiritualism, religious beliefs, and so on. When World War I ended, they called it the war to end all wars, because most of these European nations, although at the beginning of the war, a lot of the generals were probably going, yeah, I can't wait to try out these new cannons. By the end of the war, even the generals were tired because they had not imagined the devastation seen. When you talk about the flower of a generation going in England, in France, in Germany, it was just tremendous. In that I talk to people, and part of the reason I think that we don't remember World War I the same way we remember World War II is the lack of video, color video or sound, which we have a lot of from World War II. The Peter Jackson, the producer, a couple of years ago, put together a movie that they colorized called They Shall Live Forever. And it's all culled from footage from the British archives of World War I. They colorized it and they added sound to it. And it is much more, dare I say, real than silent black and white movies. It was just such a devastating war. Talking to people whose relatives were in World War One, particularly in Europe, it's very seldom is it my great grandfather who was in that war, because most of them died. It's usually my great uncle or my great great uncle who died before they had kids. A lot of dead uncles. A lot of the people who managed to have children and grandchildren, they were in the war very briefly, or they didn't serve in an area where it was as dangerous. America was only in World War One for about a year. World War One actually started in 1914, and it wasn't until it was essentially 1918 that America entered the fighting. So
Wow.
these European nations had been fighting for 4 years. The last 2 years or so were in the trenches, and with the periodic bombardments that sometimes lasted days, the artillery shells are coming back and forth, and then up over the top and rushing across no man's land to be cut down by machine guns. And as horrible and horrific as elements of World War II were, with their weapons of mass destruction, it was not as tragic as these guys for a couple of years trading 100 yards of no man's land and thousands of lives, and then losing it in the next push from the other side. It's almost indescribable to somebody without these visual representations. And what happened was, the German strategy originally was, once they settle in the trenches, we will just make it so costly that the French and the Germans and the Belgians will give up. But they themselves slaughtered their own generation. And America entering the war tipped the balance, because there were tens of thousands of fresh Americans going into the trenches with all this equipment and all this, this cheer that 4 years had removed from everybody else in the fighting.
That must have really increased the morale, just having the presence, the help.
Yes, there are a lot of letters. Just in World War II, this expression became famous, but I'm sure it began in World War One. There are only a couple things wrong about the Yanks: they're overpaid, they're oversexed, and they're over here. And so that's probably true. Americans just developed this reputation for being very, very like cheerful in the face of all kinds of crazy dangers, because Americans are kind of crazy anyway. And we proved it. Similarly, World War II began in 1939, but America didn't enter the fighting until December 7th, 1941. Again, a couple of years for these other powers to kind of expend a lot of the resources, the principal one being human lives. On the opposite side of that, when the Americans finally arrived in World War I and World War II, maybe they shouldn't have been quite so cheerful, and there's a learning curve, knowing when to duck, when not to duck, that they were behind on, that all these weary veterans in World War I and II had already developed by that time. And here these Americans show up, yes, indeed, cheerful, full of energy, but still stepping on the landmines that other people learn to recognize. But and this relates so much to paranormal, in that the tremendous loss of life.
Right.
I'm trying to find valid statistics off the top of my head, of like college graduating classes. Do you ever see the movie Chariots of Fire that came out in the 1980s? And in it, the Montague writes home about the sumptuous dinner, and they show all the names of all the graduating classes from Key's College in England, who are all dead. Essentially, probably 85 to 90% of everybody, the general population, upper class elite, as well as stable grooms, found themselves over there, and eventually in this 4-year period just dying. or gone missing. And
It's terrible.
they're still finding remnants of this in horrific ways, because this trench network was hundreds. I don't have an exact idea of the exact length of these interlocking trenches, essentially in the middle of France, going all the way into a semicircle to keep the Germans penned in,
Hmm.
dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of miles long. And the Germans had their own trench network on the other side. It was, and now they're like developing some of these areas, and they find odd and unusual things in what's now going to be a subterranean parking garage. Um, for instance, this is now about 20 years ago. They were excavating for some kind of industrial improvement, and they came down on a German bunker that had been part of the trench network. And what had happened was there was very, very heavy rain, and on top of the bunker there was a big wooden crib made out of logs, and it had been filled with dirt and rocks as a protection from an artillery shell coming down. It would absorb that, and the people in the bunker be safe. But the rain had been so heavy for several days that it supersaturated the dirt, and it turned it into a mud slurry. And just with the weight of all this water trapped inside this crib, it collapsed into the trench and killed everybody there. There were over a half dozen German soldiers who were in there. It was so quick. A couple of their bodies were still sitting on a bench. And because it was an anaerobic environment, it was so well preserved. You could read the newspaper that was on one of the desks.
Oh my goodness!
So well preserved. And you know what? That kind of accident was not unusual. So you find yourself wondering, if development continues, population grows, whatever, are they going to find more? And there's an anecdote that I find hard to believe is true, but it in a gruesome way, it kind of tickles my fancy. The Germans employed mustard gas, which was not like mustard like you would eat on a hot dog. It was a persistent blistering agent, and it could go out as a powder or in a gaseous form. And they sent it with the prevailing winds toward the European or the British and French trenches in the morning, but in the evening the wind would come from the other direction and blow it back into the German trenches and into the no man's land. So it is what's called a persistent agent. It can last a long time before it disintegrates into something less harmful. And according to one urban legend, that there had been some trees that had, the bark had been covered with the solid particulates of the mustard powder, and it got in the cracks in the bark, and then the tree continued growing and growing and growing, and that buried the mustard compound inside the tree. And then somebody cut down the tree with a chainsaw, and then they sat down on the tree stump, and in the sap from the tree was actually the mustard particles. And so they had a heavily blistered bottom after that. Now I haven't been able to verify that, but it sounds pretty gruesome, doesn't it? But they find artillery shells all the time from World War I and World War II, because they were fighting over the same land in a lot of cases in both wars.
And the trenches alone, Jeff, those must be just paranormally horrifying. The residual energy left over from just the instantaneous. These guys, half of them probably didn't even know they were killed. It happened so fast.
Yes, and as well as, the part of the theory had been in World War I for a couple of these battles is you have the artillery shells for hours and hours and hours, if not days, say from the British and French side going into the German trench line, and that pinned the Germans down inside their bunkers. And so there was this whole battle plan that hinged on The no man's land was like 150 yards wide. I'm saying that, for example, is 150 yards wide, and the bottom of the trench where the Germans were at the base of it was 60 feet down. So it would take somebody like 15 seconds to climb up to the top of the trench to get to the machine gun looking out at no man's land. And so what you do is you start lobbing the shells, and you send word, this is the last shell, and that gives your German or your English, your French guys like 15 seconds to get across no man's land to get the machine gun before the German gets to the top of the ladder to get to the machine gun. And you know what? That didn't work.
No.
And
that's a deadly game.
Yeah, and you know what? Running across that no man's land, or I would, if I were the guy climbing that ladder to get up to the machine gun, you know what? As battle hardened as I might become, you know what? I wouldn't be happy doing that day after day after day either.
No.
So the residual energy left behind by the machine gunners on their side also, it's just got to be. There are sections of the World War I trenches that have either been preserved, or if not preserved pristinely, they're kind of mapped out, marked out, and World War I historians will go and visit them. I don't know if anyone's paranormally tried to investigate. I would not be surprised. And the other thing that was super scary was being a sapper. Sapper is a tunneler. Just like in Vietnam, we had tunnel rats. Yeah. Only in the case in World War I, this is very medieval. You were in your trenches, and you had a whole bunch of people, say from Cornwall, who were coal or copper miners in Cornwall in the British Isles, and you told them, dig down at the bottom of our trench another 15 or 20 feet, and you tunnel all the way over underneath no man's land and get there, and you don't even break through. You just leave a whole bunch of munitions, then you get out.
Ooh.
And a lot of those, and the Germans are listening. They can sometimes hear the picks and shovels as they're getting closer, and so they themselves will be digging their trenches in their tunnels. And sometimes the guys died from gas, asphyxiation. The tunnels collapsed. I would not want to be a sapper. Of all the jobs, I'd rather be running through no man's land than being a sapper.
And it's terrible. And the traces of if and when they're killed, the residual traces have to be unbelievable at these places. And I've never heard of anybody. I mean, I've heard of them investigating places like Antietam and places like that, but nothing overseas. Normandy, for example, places like that. I've never heard of an investigator. I'm sure they've done it, though. I'm pretty sure they have, and I'm sure they've captured a few things. But what I want to do, I want to take a quick break, and we come back, kind of touch on World War II, get into D-Day a little bit, get into Pearl Harbor, if you don't mind talking about that. There's just, now I know that Pearl Harbor has been investigated, but I'd like to hear some history and facts behind that. I know the audience would as well. So you guys hang tight. We're going to be back right after this short, brief announcement. If you have any questions, be sure to put them in the comments there. If you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, you can post them right in there. We'll be back in just a few minutes. More Haunted Voices on the way.
Certified psychic medium Stephanie Lynn creates an authentic connection between the living and the spirit world. Stephanie knows she is here to help heal, educate, and provide validation that there is more after death, and and allows herself to be a conduit and work as a team with Spirit to pass on messages from their world to ours. Stephanie Lynn also works as a spiritual life coach to help you achieve, create, and manifest your best self and life. Looking for help communicating with an animal? Searching for a past life regression therapist? Or dealing with a paranormal experience? Stephanie Lynn is here to help. For a list of full services, visit her on Facebook under Stephanie Lynn Spirit Sensitive. That's Stephanie Lynn Spirit Sensitive.
"24 minutes past the hour on a chilly Friday night here. Haunted Voices Live. Those of you just joining us, welcome to the show. If you missed the first part with our guest, Jeff Davis, you can find all that later on. You can follow us on our Podbean channel. That's podbean.com or podbean.com/haunted voices, or just go to WLTK-DB.com/shows, and you'll be able to find all the archives right there. You'll be able to see tonight's show and all the fun stuff after. We're talking with Jeff Davis about some war history, some paranormal things that are tied to it. We're kind of discussing, of course, the war, folks, the history, the veterans. It's Veterans Day, so these facts need to be told, and Jeff is doing an amazing job doing so. Welcome back, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Todd. I am happy to be back.
Yeah, so much great information here, and you know, if you don't mind, we can push on to World War II, Pearl Harbor.
I would say, what do you want to know? But there is so much.
There is a lot. We can start with the initial history behind it, the attack. I mean, there is, I don't want to say conspiracy theories, but there are conspiracy theorists that say that we knew that this was going to happen and we did nothing. Do you know if that's factual or not?
Well, I know that there are conspiracy theorists who believe that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the series of facts. Okay, he was president at that time, and in decades previous, he was Secretary of the Navy, and this is part of the basis behind the conspiracy theory that he knew. In that Roosevelt was an expert on the U.S. Navy. You know, these days, the National Security Agency has specialists and advisors on any number of subjects, a lot less so back then. So the part of the theory is that naval intelligence had actually intercepted enough open messages or translated, deciphered, coded messages that they knew the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th over the weekend, because that was the best time to do it. And that Roosevelt knew it was going to happen and he wanted it to happen to bring America into the war, because he felt if America had stayed neutral, the Japanese and the Germans would actually have won, or that the British would have capitulated because they were worn out by this time. Remember, World War II started in 1939. It's now essentially 1942. Part of the basis behind this is that in World War I, the monster of destruction, as far as the Navy was concerned, was the battleship, the heavy battleships and the pocket battleships. Mm-hmm. In World War I, they were feared by everyone because of the massive firepower they could bring, and so there's an expression, something like, we always fight the next war with the last war's ideas, and the side that changes is usually the one that wins. So here at the beginning of World War II, America and the British and the Japanese started the war thinking it was going to be battleships again. And so that was why the Japanese first went after the super weapon, which was the battleship. And they didn't realize, some of them did, but they didn't realize that the weapon system they used to destroy the super weapon was the aircraft carrier. So in and then it follows after these victories, the Japanese, with their aircraft carrier fleet, that all of a sudden battleships, while not useless, you have to actually defeat the aircraft carriers before you can bring your battleships close to shore to start firing and reducing your enemy fortifications on land. So that they used the new superpower to defeat the old superpower. Conspiracy theorists believe that Roosevelt and his staff knew this. So that is why all the battleships were moored in their slips, as they should have been. But shortly before Pearl Harbor, the aircraft carriers were sent out to sea on a training mission. So they weren't there. They were physically not there. And that's why the Japanese didn't destroy the aircraft carrier fleet. So this ties into this belief that it's a conspiracy theory. You know what? I don't know. It's really easy to have 20/20 hindsight,
Right.
and of course there were intelligence analysts who were actually sort of like we have, various psychology and police experts predicting everything about a serial killer. So there were other analysts that said, okay, if I were the Japanese, when would I do it? And I would do it on the weekend, preferably a Sunday, and late in the year, and all this criteria, so that you might well say that these analyst reports did filter themselves up, and they were paid attention to by Roosevelt, who then separately had other intelligence assets checking the Japanese codes for that very reason. So that's kind of the basis behind Pearl Harbor being conspiracy theory, or that Roosevelt actually knew, and the reason why. And I don't know that were I Roosevelt, I don't know that I would have taken the chance of losing that quickly.
No, it was devastating. That was just devastating. The whole whole act that day. But there's one ship in particular there, the USS Arizona, that went down, that I know has been investigated by a group in Hawaii there, and they gathered some really great evidence from there. It was terrible, of course, screaming. There was a lot of screams, of course, a lot of banging. They said when they were around the area, they would record the banging noises and things of the men trying to get out. It's terrible, and I can't imagine doing a full investigation at one of these. I don't know if it would. I don't know if it would set right with me, going to a battlefield and tramping on that sacred ground where those men had died to get a few EVP or photos.
Yeah, well, and the Arizona is still considered, or when I heard last, the Arizona is still considered a commissioned ship, and the Arizona is underwater. And so every day they go out at sunrise and raise the colors, and then at the end of the day they lower the colors, and there is an interpretive center essentially above the hull of the Arizona. And they have had to send divers in periodically for things like environmental checks, because oil and fuel still leaks out. Who knows what other toxic chemicals are still down there. But the trying to even do an investigation, you would have to be essentially on a boat floating over the Arizona to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't do that. It's interesting mentioning.
There's a thing where you can walk over it. I guess where they did it was there's a platform where you can walk and look down and physically see it. I think that's where it was recorded.
Yeah,
They had special permission.
Interesting. I would prefer remembering it through the stories. Far too many years ago than I want to actually admit. When I was in high school, and a couple years after high school, I went out with a woman whose father had been on the Arizona before Pearl Harbor. And he was among other things, he was a Marine Corps honor guard. And when he was on the Arizona, the captain was a guy named Chester Nimitz. and so he was the one who stood at attention outside of the captain's quarters, ready to open the doors, close the doors, and act as a bodyguard. And he told me some interesting stories that were more humorous, that I appreciated more. At one point, he said that he was on guard as usual, but Captain Nimitz was supposed to be on the mainland somewhere in California. They, kind of clandestinely, he flew all the way from Hawaii over to California, so everybody knew he wasn't there. But the phone behind him rang, and that was the ship to shore phone, and from the docks. And he answered the phone, and a voice with a Texas accent said, "This is the captain. I'll be down in a few minutes." And he said he knew Captain Nimitz wasn't there, and he said, "Well, I'm Jesus Christ, and I'll be waiting for you." And he hung up the phone. And like 15 minutes later, Chester Nimitz came down. Didn't say a word to him. He saluted and opened the door and ushered Captain Nimitz into his quarters.
Wow.
But he also told me that each of the states, the battleships were all named after states, that the state of Arizona donated the entire silver service for the officers' mess on board the Arizona.
My goodness.
So I'm not sure if you just even took it in silver melt value, how many thousands of dollars worth of sterling silver went down with the Arizona.
That's a lot. That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit. And that leads me to a question I'd like to ask you. What do you think about haunted objects like on the Arizona, this silver set, something that they treasure? Do you think something like that could be haunted in any way?
Yeah. Yes. Objects that are the focus of attention. Among other things, I have a master's degree in archaeology, and I used to teach archaeology. And so I have some very, very old objects that were part of my teaching collection, including some Roman, legally purchased, by the way, some Roman jewelry.
Oh, nice.
I say that for the international, arts commissions. And this is one of the things that these objects were worn in Roman Britain and in Roman Europe, and then somehow they got buried. So it's easy to assume that somebody made them, somebody wore them, and for a period of maybe 2,000 years, they were buried in an archaeological context. Nobody else touched them. So one of the things when I would talk to people who said that they were very good about psychometry, which is reading impressions from objects, I would hand them some of these objects. And it was interesting. A couple of people very much were spot on what I knew about the symbolism of a couple of these rings. So I do believe objects can accrue these impressions.
Yeah. It's something that some people grasp it, some don't. A lot of things tied to, events and so forth, different objects from the war. There's a gentleman in particular, his name's Richard, that he collects haunted objects, especially war artifacts like tank cufflinks, different parts and things, and has them psychically sense, like he'll put them in the hands of a medium or something, and they will pick up everything with that particular object. So I was curious, because I know that you've studied things like that before, so I was curious.
Yeah, and I own a sword that was not used in a military sense, but it was a Philippine-style kris that was actually used in an attempted murder and a shooting.
Ooh.
And I got it at a pawn shop, and the week before I bought it from them, somebody had broken in, stole that, and then they had a fight with the police and were shot carrying that. And they carried that impression too.
Oh my goodness. And you just don't know.
No.
You just don't know.
No.
Yeah, and getting back to World War II and getting back to Pearl Harbor. Let's move on. I want to know some history, some historical facts, and what you think. To me, the most brutal battle, D-Day. It was terrible. Normandy. It was awful. It was just, I can't even imagine the the residue left on that whole area. I don't even know if it's even livable, to be honest with you. You would think everything that would be within that area would be terribly haunted.
I would think so too, but uh, maybe only at the right time of year, because there are a lot of tourists out there, and it is prime beach, and people want to recreate. But one thing that came out of a book, in my collection, that I think the book was published in the 70s, talks about how a number of people living within sight of I believe Gold Beach and Sword Beach uh, started hearing the noises and noises of gunfire, artillery, and people screaming, and they and this started at a particular time in the morning, and it continued like 60 minutes unabated. Then it stopped, and then a different type of sound came out, and they somebody went with the records from the fight at that beach, and it was exactly the same timing. When the artillery came over, and then the troop ships landed, the artillery lifted and shifted, and then the machine gun fire started, and then they made it past the machine guns. It's like at least the sound to these people, the sound of the battle, seemed to come ghostly to them.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and this was reported a couple different times. Uh, I don't know that anybody was on the beach at that time, though, which is kind of an interesting thing.
It's usually how
Uh,
it happens.
yeah, in the 1990s, my wife and I went to Bayeux, which was part of the beaches that the British landed at, and they were virtually unopposed. And they more or less marched into Bayeux, where the tapestry is, if you're a student of history. And Charles de Gaulle made a big speech, and then they kept on going. So yes, some of the it was hellacious, the loss of life. Some areas, but this is the nature of war. You swear on the dotted, you sign on the dotted line, and you raise your hand and you swear, and you have the same dangers anybody else does, but it's not your time.
Hmm.
Or you get a set of orders shifting you from this unit to that unit, and the first unit goes and does bad things, and you get sent to the Mediterranean, and enjoy the sunshine and pina coladas. And that's the nature of this too. Is in the whole chance thing, where people all around you die or are maimed, and you walk without a scratch, walk away, and this defies explanation. When I was joking about these helicopter accidents, to me that's kind of defies explanation. In one case, we were in a helicopter. It was an older Huey, and it was nighttime, and we were flying Napa the Earth. The doors were off. This is my infantry days, so the doors are off the Huey,
Wow.
and we're Napa the Earth like this. And at a couple points, the helicopter is on its side. We can look out and see the ground and see the trees, right, like that. And then all of a sudden, it was like a stutter. The helicopter actually went backward. It like jerked back. It stuttered, and then it kept on going forward. It turned out that we had hit a tree with the skid, and it ripped the skid off the helicopter.
Whoa.
We should have died.
Oh my goodness.
But the helicopter pilot was so good. This was a National Guard unit. This is in the 1980s. This guy was probably a Vietnam vet, and he was that good. Um, you can't explain it. You just, when you're younger, you think you're blessed,
Yeah, you're invincible.
and when you get older, you kind of wonder, and you have to thank somebody that's not you. Um, But this kind of brings me originally, especially in World War One, the whole effect World War One had on spiritualism and a belief in the paranormal had to do with this tremendous loss of life, and actually the creation of unintentional creation of a whole false myth. I won't call it a fraud because it was unintentional, but embedded within people talking about spiritualism and it's not your time. It was actually about what some people call the Angels of Mons. Mons is a place in Belgium, and there was a battle there between the British Expeditionary Force and the Germans in August of 1914. And the British had not suffered a defeat for many, many years.
Sure.
During World War One, their Expeditionary Force vastly outnumbered and trapped, and so they fought a 2-day battle against an overwhelming German force, and they initially held their own, and they held off the Germans long enough that they managed to withdraw in good order, but with heavy losses.
Mm-hmm.
And it was everybody back home in Britain. Consider this: this is only a couple weeks into the beginning of World War One, and so the British Expeditionary Force left, and women are throwing them flowers and blowing them kisses, and just like the Yanks in World War One, we won't come back till it's over there. They
Right.
thought it would be a short war, and so they land, and within weeks, the Germans, pardon my French, the Germans are kicking their ass, and especially Mons was like a wake up call, but it was such a blow to the average British citizen, and so about a month later, in September of 1914, an author, his name was Arthur Machen, who's Welsh, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, wrote a story called The Bowman, and it was published in a magazine called the Evening News. He was hired as a reporter at that point, and he wrote this. This is a fictional story, but it's told in the first person about I was there at the Battle of Mons, and there the Germans were advancing on us, and we thought we were all going to die, and we were resigned to our fate, but we were calling on God. God is right, and we're in this war for the right reasons. God is on our side. And then suddenly we saw the shadowy figures of English longbowmen appear in our ranks.
Mm.
And they stood up, just like at Agincourt in the 1400s, and they fired volley after volley after volley of arrows at the Germans, and it killed the Germans. And the German officers were actually shooting their own men who were running away, and there was just total panic. And then the bowmen disappeared, and when they examined the bodies, they couldn't find any arrow holes. This was like God's judgment. God is on our side. He's brought the ghosts of Henry V, St. Crispin's Day. We in it shall be remembered, be he ne'er so vile. This day shall gentle his condition, and men in England safe home abed shall curse the manhood, and that they were not here on St. Crispin's Day. Hey! I'm sorry, I can't resist misquoting Shakespeare, but so this was published, and it was a work of kind of inspirational fiction. He didn't even consider it his best writing, and yet there were requests to republish it. See, it was when they published it, they did not say this is a work of fiction. But people requested permission to reprint it, and of course he's an author, is how he's making money. So he said, "Sure, go ahead and reprint it." And he got reprinted in several what they called parish magazines. That is, churches and Church of England, and this for inspiration they would be reading and reciting these things, these events, and so they didn't say it was a work of fiction either. And then there was a call to actually publish it in book form with some other articles that he wrote. And somebody contacted him, several people contacted him, said, "Can you tell me the source? we'd like to go back to the originals. And he said, no, this is a work of fiction. The battle happened, and I got the details from our own news service of the people, the dates, the place, and everything. But the Bowman is all fiction. And he had people disagree with him. They said, no, that can't be true. It just sounds so right. And so he spent years and years trying to tell people, no, this is a work of fiction. And the book is past copyright, and so people can download it. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but I did send you a copy.
Briefly.
In the foreword of this book, he's saying, no, this didn't happen. And there were other people who kind of dogpiled on this, exaggerators, other fiction writers, people who had a point to make. And pretty soon it came to be not just English longbowmen, but it was this mysterious fog that hid that the British could see through a little bit, and so then shoot the Germans, but the Germans couldn't see through it. And then it became a host of armed angels led by St. George, the patron saint of England.
Oh, wow.
And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he was still, for years later, saying, no,
It's not real.
It's not real. And what's ironic is Arthur Machen's real name, and I had this written down so I get it right, Arthur Llewellyn Jones is his real name, and he was born in 1863, and prior to World War I, he wrote a whole bunch of esoteric, spiritual, science fiction, Gothic novels. The most famous was The Great God Pan, who a very young H.P. Lovecraft read and said, this is like the best work, anybody else's work that I've ever read in the genre. And he may well have influenced, Great God Pan influenced the whole Cthulhu universe of H.P. Lovecraft.
That's incredible, over that false story.
Well, some of his other work, but this is a guy who kind of cut his chops on spiritualism as well as science fiction. And here in World War I, he's saying, no, this is not true. And like nobody's believing him. And this is embedded. As a matter of fact, last night I went on a couple of military history websites, American ones, and they're recounting and re-embellishing the Angels of Mons, from the Bowman to the Mist to the Angels to now. It is just so embedded that I didn't dare comment, because I'm sure I would have gotten flamed and banned from that history website. Yeah.
Poor Jay.
Because people wanted to believe. And this ties into, for me, an analysis of spiritualism, the American Spiritualist Church. The spiritualist churches started in America, and then they spread to Europe. And in your book, your intro, you talk about the Fox sisters in America, in upper state New York. And this is a belief that they, for quick background, the Fox family moved into a rented farmhouse, and they started hearing knocks and cracks and sounds. And two of the daughters ended up talking to it and just started answering them, like one knock for yes, two knocks for no. That originated with the Fox family. And this then spun off into this spiritual church movement. And forgive me, people who are very much into this, and this is your lifestyle, I'm going to try and very briefly summarize, and I'm going to get some of this wrong, because just when you say this is what everybody believes, somebody's going to send Todd a text message. That's not what I believe. But in essence, the Fox family, and in Europe, they were all Christian or Christian influenced denominations, Catholic or Protestant. And the belief is that God's power manifests itself in individuals today, in ministers and in lay ministers, and so that they can perform very similar things that you read about in the Old Testament. For instance, in the Old Testament, the witch of Endor, who conjures the spirit of Samuel for King Saul, and the rushing of the winds, the speaking in tongues. And so that members of the American Spiritualist Church and the European Spiritualist Church, through God's will, can manifest that and bring the spirits of the dead back and channel them. And so in the 1800s, late 1800s, it was an intellectual movement to have seances on a nightly basis among the educated elite to explore this, depending on your point of view, pseudo-scientifically or scientifically. And we move forward into the early 1900s and into World War I. The flower of a generation dies. Everybody wants to get in touch with their deceased relatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so people like Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, he was a spiritualist. He was very much into questioning, and nobody doubts that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle didn't have a scientific background and training, and yet he believed in spirit writing. His wife was a spirit writer, and so he very much experimented with this. The bad thing is, of course, there's a lot of money out there, and a lot of people, a lot of charlatans came up to fill that void. Give me money and I will channel your dead son who died at the Battle of the Somme.
So sad.
Yeah, and that then brings discredit on these spiritualist churches. I did some newspaper searching in a couple of places where there was a spiritualist church, I think in Spokane, and there were newspaper articles written on it and pamphlets that at the very beginning were very, very favorable, or at least neutral, but at the end of World War I, they're not quite so favorable or neutral. But this is where these days, you get people very conservatively saying, no, I don't believe in ghosts. It's all nonsense. Only ignorant people believe in it. And yet, 120 years ago, it was the intellectual elite.
You're right.
Who were interested in it and said, let's experiment with this.
It was the educated that did it. And it was the educated that falsely had the ectoplasm and so forth. They created all these things with it. It's just amazing. And my goodness, Jeff, time flies. This hour is gone. And we talked about so many amazing things. Thank you so very much for taking time out to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I just wish we had another hour. I'm sure the audience will say, no, we want to go to bed.
No.
But it has been interesting for me too. And thank you for giving me a chance, especially to talk about the Battle of Mons.
Oh, it's my pleasure. These things have to be said. I mean, it's just like you said, history and the paranormal go hand in hand. Any way you slice it, they really do. And you, sir, know your history.
You know what? I try.
You definitely do. Well, tell the folks real quick how they can get a hold of you, about your books, all the good stuff. The mic's yours.
All right. My website is ghostsandcritters.com. Let me duck my head a little bit. Yeah. Okay. There we go. .com. And I do sell books off that. If you live locally in the Portland, Vancouver area, there are a whole bunch of links there where you can email me. And I do ghost walks at the very famous Vancouver Barracks in Vancouver, Washington. And look for me on, hopefully, if they renew Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. If you've seen the show and like it, please go on IMDb and say so, because we want to be renewed. There's plenty more to do. Hello, Katie. Thank you. And hey, just send Todd emails telling him you want me back.
Oh, definitely going to have you back, Jeff. That is an absolute, my friend. We barely scratched the surface, and I'd love to have you back here on a future show.
Pretty much any time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeff, and happy Veterans Day. Thank you for your service, sir.
All right. Thank you, Todd. Thank everybody who's taken an interest. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And there he was, folks, author Jeff Davis, ghostandcritters.com. Be sure and check out his website. Now, for what we got coming up here next week is open discussion. So bring your questions, bring whatever you have with. It's going to be an open discussion. It's going to be a lot of fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the link. I'm going to put the link in there in the comments so you guys can come backstage and come on the show if you like. If you wanted to do something like that. We're going to do that next week, open discussion. And if you're wondering where Nicole is, well, she is on hiatus until January. She's got a lot of projects in the works. She's getting some of those completed, and then she's going to be back in January. So don't worry, she didn't jump ship. She's just probably researching her favorite ship, the Queen Mary. But we've got open discussion. Then coming up on the 25th, we've got William Becker. He's going to be coming up here. Awesome guy, a little skeptical. It's going to be a lot of fun talking about that. And coming up on December 2nd, we've got Ryan Stacy. And on December 9th, you definitely want to mark your calendars for this. Mike Rickseker's coming on. We're going to be talking about Shadow Men, all the good stuff with Mike and his latest accomplishments and what he's got going on. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen to the live show tonight. I know it's tough to catch a live show, and I know a lot of you guys catch the podcast, and that's perfectly fine. We've got everything saved for you to do that on demand. So from all of us here at WLTK-DB, you guys have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for tuning in to Haunted Voices. Take care.